Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the good morning to get us started out there. I am Matt Ewald. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. Welcome to those joining us in person here at Southern Methodist University and those joining us online from around the state for our day-long conversation in partnership with the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life, Religion News Service in SMU's Religious Studies Department, program titled Telling the Story of Religion in Texas Through Journalism. We are grateful to the scholars, journalists, community leaders, students, and others from around the state who have gathered here in Dallas and all those joining us online so we can explore together how religion shapes our state and how journalism is capturing its evolving role. Through a keynote presentation by Robert Jones, president and founder of Public Religion Research Institute this morning, and panel conversations throughout the day, we'll survey the current state of religion reporting in Texas, examine religion's importance in telling the full story of Texas, highlight underrepresented communities, issues, and perspectives, and discuss journalism's role in shaping the public understanding of faith. So each program today will run an hour with 45 minutes of either presentation or moderated conversation, and then 15 minutes of Q&A. And so that we can get to as many questions as possible today, we'll be doing all of our Q&A through our Q&A portal at texastribune.org/ask. For those here joining us here in person at SMU, right out in the lobby, you'll find a couple signs with QR codes. You can use that to also access texastribune.org/ask. That way we'll be able to get to as many questions as possible. And if you're old school and just want a note card to write a question on, that's fine. Hold it up and I'll grab it. We will be taking a few breaks throughout the day and an hour for lunch. Just for conversation, networking here. So for those watching online, you can return to the live stream on the same webpage you're viewing right now, or you can catch up on any conversations you've missed when we make all of our panel conversations available on demand tomorrow. We're grateful for the support of our sponsors who have made today possible, including the Henry Luce Foundation, Humanities Texas, and the Eula May and John Bow Foundation. We are grateful to our sponsors, but please know they play no role in the curation of speakers and programming for today's symposium. On behalf of the Tribune, we just also want to thank all those around the state who've made the journalism of the Tribune, including like this, possible by becoming Texas Tribune members. You can learn more about membership at texastribune.org/support. Lastly, we want to thank our host, Southern Methodist University, and SMU's Religion Department. To offer a quick welcome, I turn the program over first to Professor Jill DeTemple, Department Chair, who will say a few words, and then introduce Provost Elizabeth G. Laboa, SMU's Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs.
Thank you so much, and good morning. Welcome. My name is Jill DeTemple, and I'm the chair of the Department of Religious Studies in Dedman College of Humanities and Sciences here at SMU. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to today's conference, Telling the Story of Religion in Texas Through Journalism. I would like to especially thank the Texas Tribune, the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life, and Religious News Service for co-sponsoring this event. The Department of Religious Studies is dedicated to the interdisciplinary study of religion, employing methods drawn from across the humanities and social sciences to examine the world's religious traditions as social, cultural, and historical phenomena. So we are thrilled to be able to host this conference. This is what we do, y'all, and we are so happy to have you all here. And all of us are here because we know that journalistic coverage of religion is crucial if we are going to understand the different ways that people live out religions and the different roles religion play in society. Because of the panelists gathered today, we're going to understand that even better. And now I'd like to introduce Provost Elizabeth Laboa, SMU Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. DeTemple. Good morning. On behalf of Southern Methodist University, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's conference on telling the story of religion in Texas through journalism. Whether you're attending in person or virtually, we are happy that you have decided to join us for this important event. SMU is delighted that the Department of Religious Studies is hosting this conference and grateful to work together with the event's co-sponsors, the Texas Tribune, the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life, and Religion News Service. Thank you to all who helped organize the event and to the impressive roster of speakers who will be leading today's discussions. The conference's subject matter is a natural fit for SMU. While our mission is to shape world changers who will contribute to their communities and excel in their professions in a global society, we recognize that the global society for us starts at home here in Texas. Telling the stories of Texas is important, and telling the stories of religion in Texas is important. SMU proudly supports the study of religion. One can carry out that study here in multiple venues within the Department of Religious Studies in Dedman College, which examines religion from a non-sectarian perspective, at Perkins School of Theology, which provides a theological education for ministerial students, and in other academic units across the university, such as history, anthropology, sociology, English, and art history. Students who desire to study religion at the graduate level can do so in multiple programs through the Moody School of Graduate and Advanced Studies, in whose new state-of-the-art building we are convening today. And likewise, SMU offers respected programs in journalism and in corporate communications and public affairs through Meadows School of the Arts. We're an institution that values interdisciplinary teaching, research, and conversation of the sort facilitated by this conference, which brings together experts from so many different fields. SMU embraces excellence, integrity, intellectual freedom, and open dialogue. These are the fundamental values that undergird everything our university does. They are the same values at the heart of the journalistic enterprise, the values that make journalism so vital for a healthy society. It is in the spirit of those values that this conference will explore the intersection of religion and journalism here in the Lone Star State. We welcome you all again to what promises to be a day of fascinating and important discussion. Thank you all for being here.
Provost, thank you so much, and Professor DeTemple as well. One last note before we begin today's program. We hope today's program will be of value to all who join us in person and online. And as we consider how religious communities are represented and underrepresented in Texas, we just want to make room for each other's perspectives and invite us to approach our conversations with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to listen deeply. We will hear from our partners at Religion News Service a little later today, but here to offer a welcome and introduce our first speaker, Tiffany Puett, Executive Director of the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tiffany Puett. I'm the founder and executive director of the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life. We're a nonprofit organization based in Austin, and we work to build a more democratic public spaces in Texas through storytelling, research, and education. A lot of our work centers around telling a bigger story of Texas that includes all the people who live here. We're so thrilled to be partnering with the Texas Tribune, Religion News Service, and SMU for this event today, and for what promises to be a really timely and important series of conversations that I know will be really riveting, and that everyone will really come away with some thought-provoking ideas. So we're so glad that you can be here. And I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Robert P. Jones, the president and founder of the Public Religion Research Institute. So Robert P. Jones' most recent book is The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future. Jones writes regularly on politics, culture, and religion for The Atlantic, Time, Religion News Service, and other outlets. He is frequently featured in major national media such as CNN, MSNBC, NPR, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and others. He's also the author of White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity, which won a 2021 American Book Award, and I believe now has the distinction of being a banned book as of this past Friday. And he's the author of The End of White Christian America, which won the 2019 Grawemeyer Award in Religion. Jones writes weekly at www.whitetolong.net, a newsletter focused on religion, racial justice, and democracy. He holds a PhD in religion from Emory University and an MDiv from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Welcome, Robbie.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I was not born in Texas, but as many people like to say here, I got here as quick as I could. I arrived here somewhere between age 2 and 3. I went to, my parents moved here. I went to kindergarten in Wichita Falls. I went to first grade in San Antonio. And then they drugged me off to Mississippi, where I spent the rest of my time. But I made my way back for 6 years and lived in Fort Worth, where I attended Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, as Tiffany just pointed out. So about a decade I've spent here, and during that time I'm staying over here at the Beeman and on Central Expressway. And it brought back a little bit of PTSD for me because my last 2 years of graduate school, I was living in Fort Worth and working at Lennox Industries up in Richardson and commuted every day. Made that commute, so it's a very familiar pathway to me. But thank you all for being here, and thanks so much for the Texas Tribune for sponsoring this, for IDCL, for Religion News Service, and SMU, of course, for hosting us in this beautiful space. My job today, I think, is just to set the table, to give you some data that is about when we say the complex story of religion in Texas, what do we mean? What does the religious landscape in Texas look like? How does it compare to the religious landscape of the country? How has it changed, particularly just in recent decades here, and what does that mean for the future? And most of all, I think some of the work that our data at Public Religion Research Institute does is it breaks stereotypes. And it breaks assumptions. And many of these assumptions are based on very, very old kind of conventional wisdom about, so what just comes to mind when you hear religion in Texas? Like if you conjure up a person, what does that person look like? Like racially, religiously, who are they? And then how representative then is that little icon that your brain just automatically conjures up? How accurate is that, right, to what religion actually looks like in Texas? If, for example, you were to go down to the State House and interview, and I look for data, I could not find it. If it's here, somebody let me know of like what the actual religious affiliation is of all the elected officials representing the state in Texas, and you were to compare that to the actual breakdown of Texas, it would look quite different, I am sure, even though I don't have the data to back that up. But it would be much less white and much less Christian, right? And certainly much less evangelical Christian in its makeup. So mostly I'm going to kind of give some data about that and compare some things in Texas. I am going to use the D word here. And these are days that we're in, religion diversity in Texas, because that is what we're talking about. So and this data is actually hot off the press. This is 2024 data that we have just crunched and out for 2025. So this is all Americans in one pie chart, all Texans in another. I've done some kind of broad coloring here. So the bluish colors are varieties of white Christians, right, in the country and in Texas. The greenish colors are varieties of Christians of color. In both the U.S. and Texas. The kind of orange to yellow are non-Christian religious traditions. And then that little pinkish magenta slice there are the religiously unaffiliated in the country and in Texas. So even if you don't, you can't kind of go down to every single one of these, you could see the big blocks here. And I'll talk about the change part of this in a moment, but just to kind of note here, for example, if in your mind, when you thought about what's a typical religious person in Texas, and you were thinking a white Christian person, you would be describing only 1 in 3 Texans, right? By that kind of stereotype of who a religious Texan is. In fact, there are far more Christians of color in Texas than there are white Christians in Texas. And just if you think, I think the archetype might be in white evangelical Christian you think of in Texas, right? As Southern Baptists, for example, these are my people where I grew up, Southern Baptists. White evangelicals make up only 14% of Texans. Right, so kind of take that in. Like usually when and it's true in the country too, they make up only 13% of Americans and only 14% of Texans. Usually there are jaws dropping, right, when people, I say that because they're so present, right, in many other ways and kind of wielding power in some other ways. But it's disproportional to their actual numbers in the country. The other thing to say is that the white non-evangelical Protestants, these are the kind of so-called mainline Protestants, your Presbyterians, Methodists, we're here at SMU, the Methodists, are almost as big in Texas as the white evangelicals are, right? They're 11% of the population versus 14%. And in the country, they are exactly the same proportion of the country as white evangelicals are. And then white Catholics here, you could see, and if you think about the Catholic Church in Texas, look at this. White Catholics make up 6% of Texans. Latino Catholics make up 19% of Texans, right? They are 3 times as big. So if you're kind of thinking about the Catholic Church in Texas, it is 3 parts Latino and 1 part white, right? So thinking about that is, I think, an interesting way of kind of thinking about the diversity here. And then finally, the other big wedge is that the biggest slice on here shaves out by 1 percentage point are the unaffiliated in Texas. So there's a way to think, what is the largest quote unquote religious group in Texas? It is, like the country, the religiously unaffiliated. These are people who, when we ask their religion, we say, what is your religion? Are you, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu? We kind of ask all the way down the line. These are people who say nothing in particular, or they say, oh, I'm atheist or agnostic. They won't claim a religious tradition on the list. So they make up nearly 3 in 10 Americans. They make up 2 in 10 Texans. So it's slightly less in Texas, but it still edges out Latino Catholics as the largest single wedge here. And the way that kind of sociologists typically break out these traditions. The other thing to say is that in the country, in Texas, it's slightly smaller, but it's about 6% who belong to non-Christian religious traditions here. So Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, et cetera. That's the kind of orange slices here. But it's a little shy of 1 in 10 here in Texas as well. So that's kind of the big picture. And I'll kind of break this down a little bit. So here's an interesting project we did a few years ago. This is a county-by-county map of a composite measure of religious diversity inside of each county. Now, basically what we did, I'm going to go back real quick, is we took all these categories here that you see over there on the right, and we did a statistical measure that measures diversity by basically saying if in a county, every member of that county was a member of just one of these religions, you would score a perfect 1. On that. If in the county, you would score a 0, actually, as the other way around. You would score 0 if every member of the religion was in the same category. Every person was same religion. If all of these were equally represented, you would score 1, right? So if it's kind of equal divisions, and then depending on how skewed it is, the score kind of becomes lower or higher. So this is what this is measuring. This is a county by county measure using those categories of religious diversity in the country. So the darker colors are more diversity. And you can see that, Texas kind of you can see it blending in with the South a little bit, especially East Texas, like lighter colors in East Texas. But the further west, the further south you go, the darker the colors get. And you can also see the kind of pop-ups for metropolitan areas as well, where you typically also see more diversity. Here's blowing up Texas here. So you can see Fort Worth, Dallas, where we are, is one of the darker regions with more diversity. Houston, Corpus Christi, Laredo, El Paso, but basically, as you kind of head south and west, right, there begins to be less homogeneity, more diversity by race and religion in Texas. So, and by the way, this map was based on more than 500,000 interviews that we conducted over the last like 8 years. So it's a lot of people that we talked to kind of produce this county by county map. It is on the website, so you can actually go play around with it if you want to kind of look up your county online at prri.org. So what about change? How does this change over time? So I'm going to use a metric of white Christians in the country as a metric for change overall. So in the kind of early 2000s, if you measured all white Christians in the country was a majority white Christian country. 54% in 2006, the country was white and Christian. Today, that number is 40% at the national level, right? So we've gone from a country that was 56% white and Christian to one that is 40% white and Christian today. So these are the numbers by state. I'm going to show you 2007, and I'm going to show you today. I'll go back and forth so you can see it. So Texas right there, you see it, 44% white and Christian in 2007. And you can also see kind of everybody else. Now, this is the same scale. Here is 2024, right? So I'm just going to give you a sense of it. Right, you can just kind of see the shift, and it's everywhere. It's not just California, it's not just New York, right? It is everywhere across the country. So Texas has gone from being 44 to 31% white and Christian kind of over this time. And that's just kind of one metric of seeing this shift in diversity over time and more complexity in the religious landscape really everywhere in the country. To kind of give you a sense of this in Texas, here is the full breakdown, a kind of stacked bar instead of pie charts this time, of all the religious makeup in 2007 versus 2024. And you can really see kind of the biggest shifts are actually at the top and the bottom. Right? So the biggest shifts are the drop in white evangelicals from 23% of the population to 14% of the population inside of Texas, and the jump in the religiously unaffiliated from 12 to 20. Those are the kind of two biggest kind of movements there. There's some slight shifts around the edges. Each of the white Christian groups has dropped, with the exception of white Catholics. They've remained the same at 6%, but the white non-evangelicals have dropped. Some other kind of movement, but the big movements are really in the drop in white evangelicals and the kind of rise in religiously unaffiliated in the country. To give you a sense of what the white Christian subgroups look like over time, this is the country. So the kind of big ones we measure: white evangelical, white non-evangelical, white Catholic. This is what the drop looks like from 2007 to 2004 in the country, right? So white evangelicals go from 23% to 13% in the country. The white non-evangelical go from 19% and end up exactly the same place at 13%. White Catholics is a little less pronounced, a little more stability here, but still from 16 down to 12, right? And so you can just see it. It's not just one group. It is led actually by white evangelicals. The drop is steeper there, but it is across all groups. Here's the same data for Texas. Here are white evangelicals, again, from 23%. We don't have data that's, I think, accurate for Texas from 2008 to 2012, but we do pick it back up again in 2013, and you can see it continue to drop. Here are white non-evangelical Protestants. Here, a little bit less, but 14 to 11, and then stability, really, among white Catholics. If you're wondering why the little jitters there in 2020, 2021, it's because COVID made data collection a little wonky during the COVID years. So, and so it's either that people started identifying more, or the data just got a little wonky during collecting data during the COVID the COVID years. I'm not quite sure which it is. But so here's another one to kind of pay attention to is the changing religious affiliation of Hispanic Texans over time. There's a lot of complexity among Latinos. It's often like just kind of glossed over. And maybe people think, oh, well, if they're Latino, they're Catholic, right? And there's a lot of churn happening here. So here is the number of Latinos as Catholic, again, 2013 to 2024. A little bit of a drop, basically from 56% down to 47%. This is, again, among Latinos in Texas. The number of Latino Protestants has creeped up a bit, 24 to 27%. This one may surprise you. It's the unaffiliated, right, that are actually driving more of the change here. It's from 15% to 20, so 5% jump, 15% to 20%. Other religions basically stayed the same. But interesting, sort of a little bit less Catholic, a little more unaffiliated, with Latino Protestants remaining kind of stable over time here in Texas. But the overall thing is about half of Latinos are Catholic, about a quarter right, are Protestant, but about 1 in 5 are unaffiliated, and that's a growing piece of the population here as well. This is one of my favorite charts to kind of look at it's putting a lot of things together, but I think it helps tell a story about an overlaying politics and religion and age, sort of all in one chart. So what am I doing here? So I've just put the data for the parties. So what do the parties look like if I break them down in big categories? Percent white Christian, percent Christians of color, percent other non-Christian religions, and percent unaffiliated. So bigger boxes here, but just to give us a big sense of things, look at the difference between Democrats and Republicans in Texas here, just on the white Christian measure, right? So Republicans in Texas, 59% white and Christian, Democrats, 13% white and Christian, independents right there in the middle at 28%. Christians of color, Democrats, 60% Christians of color, right, in Texas. Republicans, only a quarter Christians of color. And then other non-Christian religions, fairly small. But then the unaffiliated, really the Republican number is the one that jumps out here. Only 1 in 10 Republicans are religiously unaffiliated versus 3 in 10 independents and 22% of Democrats. So that's just the kind of partisan religion overlay. So what happens if I kind of work in the religion piece of this? It gets pretty interesting. And what I'm going to do here is I've got the age groups and same categories. And so there are 18 to 29-year-olds, right, in the country. So one of the questions is like, which age group do the two political parties look more like, is one way of kind of reading this. Democrats basically look like 18-year-old Texans, right, in their religious and racial makeup here. Republicans look like 70-year-old Texans, right, in terms of their religious and racial makeup. Now, you know, if I were looking into my crystal ball to the future, I would be worried about this if I were a Republican in Texas, just because of this makeup here, that it's an outlier, right? It's very, very much more older, looks more like seniors in Texas versus Gen Z in Texas, which Democrats look much more like. The national, I don't have one for but the national thing looks basically like this as well. It's very, very similar in the country. I should say, I see some people taking some pictures of the slides. We're going to make these available on the Texas Tribune website afterwards, so they'll be up. You're free to take pictures, of course, right now, but we'll have them up as well and available for everyone. These are all public. So here's another question, too. What about all the stuff we're hearing about shutting down conversations around, or like the kind of country we want to live in, and shutting down conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion? We asked this question about, like, what kind of a country do you want to live in of Americans and Texans? And the question basically had two poles. It said you could put yourself anywhere on the scale. On the one end of the scale is, I prefer the U.S. to be a nation made up of people from all over the world. On the other end of the scale, I prefer the U.S. to be made up primarily of people of Western European heritage. It turns out that, when he's kind of scored it, that among Americans, 6 in 10 said, I prefer the U.S. to be made a nation of people from all over the world. Only 7% put themselves now near the other end of the scale, preferring the U.S. to be a nation made primarily of people from Western European heritage. About 1 in 3 put themselves somewhere in the middle of the scale, kind of not sure. Here's Texans. it looks exactly the same as the country, right? So 6 in 10 say, no, I want the nation to be made of people from all over the world. Only 7% say want to be made of people from Western European heritage. Now, we ask the same question about religion. What kind of a country do you want to live in terms of religious pluralism and diversity? And here, same thing, scales, 2 questions on either side. I prefer the nation to be made up of people belonging to a wide variety of religions. I prefer the U.S. to be a nation primarily made up of people who follow the Christian faith. All right, here, this time it's 50% of Americans who say, I want a nation to be belonging to a wide variety of religions. It doubles, actually it almost triples. It's 18% now who say, nope, I want to live in a mostly Christian country on the other end, but it's still about a third in the middle. Texans here are a little bit different. Here, they are more likely to say, I want to live in a Christian country by about 10 percentage points compared to, but it's still more Texans than not, right, who say, by a good margin, it's 41% who say, no, I want to live in a nation of people belonging to a wide variety of religions versus those who say, I want to live in a nation primarily made of people who follow the Christian faith. So a little bit about Christian nationalism in Texas. As many of you have been following PRI's work, we've been one of the people producing the largest set of data on measuring Christian nationalism. Because we've been doing it a lot at the national level, we also have reliable data all the way down to the state level in Texas. So we can kind of give you a good snapshot here. These are the measures that we use to measure Christian nationalism. There are 5 agree, disagree statements. You can completely agree, you can completely disagree with these statements. And I put up here the average answer for all Americans and all Texans. And you can basically see in Texas, there's slightly more support for every single one of these questions, usually on the level of 5 to 6 percentage points over where all Americans are on this. The way that we score this is that you have to kind of answer them all in one direction before we kind of put you on a scale. And so we got to do a statistical measure that measures the consistency of people's answers across these categories. And then we put people into categories based on their answer to these scales. Here's the country. And we scored them on four categories. Christian nationalism adherents are those who completely agree, basically, with all 5 of those questions. Sympathizers are those who agree but don't completely agree, right? So softer. The skeptics are those who disagree but don't completely disagree, and the rejectors are those who completely disagree with all 5 of those statements. Again, so answering one question won't get you anywhere on the scale. You have to answer basically all of them one way or the other to kind of put you in one of these categories. It's about 3 in 10 Americans who lean toward agreeing with those statements. So 1 in 10 who completely agree with all those statements. We call those Christian nationalism adherents. 2 in 10 that are sympathetic, so kind of completely agree. So it's only about 3 in 10 in the country that agree with that. Here are the Texas numbers for that. As you might expect from looking at those individual measures, it's a little bit bigger, right? So it's 13%, so plus 3 in the adherence categories, and it's 23%, another plus 3. For the sympathizer category. So that means it's 36% versus 30%, right, of Texans that lean in there. Still, the number of people who disagree with those statements, right, are nearly 2 to 1, higher than the people who agree with those statements here. So that's kind of the lay of the land in terms of Christian nationalism. I do want to point this out, though, that one of the things we found in the 2024 election and 2020, we actually were able to measure this all the way down to the state level, is that there was a very, very strong independent prediction of support for Christian nationalism and support for Donald Trump at the ballot box. In fact, if I were writing a statistics textbook and I wanted to say, what an example of a strong linear correlation looked like in a scatter plot, this could be it, right? In my intro to stats textbook. So the x-axis is a raw score on Christian nationalism. So the further to the right you are, the higher the voters in that state supported Christian nationalism. The vertical axis is percent vote for Trump. I've highlighted Texas there in orange, right there in the middle of the scale. You can see it is right on that linear line, right? My home state of Mississippi is way out there on the right, furthest, highest support for Christian nationalism and almost the highest support for Trump. This is among all Americans. If you do it just among white Americans, the dots actually even get closer, right? If you reduce it just to white Americans, this is actually all Americans here. But you can see how powerful a predictor and how powerful in our politics today just this orientation toward Christian nationalism actually is. So here I want to compare by party, and you can kind of see how this falls out by party. These are the people who qualify in those top two categories, adherents and sympathizers. So the percent who are in both of those top two categories. Among all Americans, it's a majority of Republicans, 53%. Among Texans, it's 58% of Republicans in Texas who qualify as either Christian nationalism adherents or sympathizers. And then you could see it just drop off. Political scientists have, we hear a lot about polarization, right, in our politics, but the real term you want here is asymmetric polarization, right? That's the term that political scientists have been using to describe ways in which one political party looks like more of an outlier, even compared to independents and the other political party. That's what we have here. So Democrats and independents look much closer together, right, on these measures than do Republicans. So you see that just jump, right? It's not a stair step. It's like a thing and a cliff is what you see in these measures. Here's religion. I want to kind of give you the breakdown by religion. So this is all Americans. You basically see there are only two groups where a majority, again, are in those top two categories, either adherents or sympathizers. It's white evangelical Protestants and Latino Protestants or Hispanic Protestants. Now, for those of you in the room, this room probably all know this, but just to say it, Latino Protestants tend to be evangelical themselves. They tend to be charismatic, Pentecostal, that orientation, and that kind of close cousin theology to white evangelicals often kind of bleeds over into politics. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here as well. African-American Protestants are the highest one, but they're below the level. And interestingly enough, even among African-American Protestants who score high on the Christian nationalism scale, it does not translate into their political outlook. It's interesting in the way that it does for white Christians. But here are the numbers for Texas, right? You can see they'll all go up slightly across the board, right? So just among white evangelicals in Texas, it is 71%. Who score in that either that adherent or sympathizer category. So a good 7 points higher even than the country. Among Latino Protestants, it's a few points higher. And just across the board, it's a little bit higher with the exception of the main line, which is exactly the same, but a little bit higher across other religious traditions as well. But it really is those top two groups, white evangelicals and Latino Protestants, where this has some power, I think. The other thing to say about why we should be worried about this, other than the fact that on the face of it, claiming this country is a Christian country is a fundamental denial of our constitutional commitment to religious liberty and diversity and to kind of pluralistic democracy, is because Christian nationalism is also highly correlated with other worrisome things from a standpoint of a democracy and peaceful transfer of power and all of those kind of key things for democracy, in particular political violence. So we've been asking this question for a long time, and it is a agree-disagree question. Because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may need to resort to violence in order to save our country. Now, and the good news is, in the country as a whole, only 17% of Americans and only 18% of Texans agree with that statement. But when you start breaking it down by those who agree with Christian nationalism, you can see that it doubles. The propensity to support violence doubles among those who are Christian nationalism adherents. It goes from 18% to 40% in Texas. That's 4 in 10 of those who say they are Christian national are classified as Christian nationalism adherents, who also say, yes, we may need to resort to violence to save our country. I'm going to close with a couple of policy attitudes and then a little word to journalists here. So another thing in terms of breaking stereotypes, I couldn't resist kind of showing this because we have good data all the way down in Texas. You'll hear statements sometimes from folks that will say, well, people of faith are opposed to abortion, right? Or Texans of faith are opposed to abortion. I kind of want to there's nothing data can really help. Turns out, well, that's true for some religious Texans, but it's actually not even true of most religious Texans. So here are the support for the legality of abortion, say that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. In the country, it's 63% of Americans, it's 59% of all Texans. And in fact, the only groups, again, who fall below majority support for the legality of abortion are those same two groups we saw on the other slide, right? Latino Protestants and white evangelical Protestants. And white evangelicals are particularly different than the rest of the country. Like really, down there, only 23% support. Latino Protestants are actually quite basically divided on the question, nearly half here. But everybody else is in majority territory. Here is a similar chart on marriage equality. Favor allowing same-sex couples to marry legally. In the country, it is 67% of all Americans. It's 61% of all Texans. And again, you see the same pattern. It is a majority of most religious Texans, right, that say, yes, same-sex couples should be allowed to marry legally. It is these same two groups, Latino Protestants and white evangelicals, that are the exception to the rule in Texas. And then I wanted, since Texas is the textbook capital of the world, I couldn't resist putting this one in as well, given the attacks on our history and how we teach history. So we asked this question, and we gave people two choices about how should we handle what we teach to our children about our nation. We gave them two choices. We should teach our children both the good and bad aspects of our history so they should learn from the past, or we should not teach our children history that can make them feel uncomfortable or guilty about what their ancestors did in the past. It is 94% of Americans and 90% of Texans who say the first thing. We should teach them both the good and the bad of our history so we can learn from the past. And we've asked this question 4 or 5 different ways. It always comes out like this. So it's not just the question wording. It is really where most Americans are on this issue. So with that, I'm going to just say a final word to some journalists here. So I've been at PRI now since 2009. Our primary audience actually is journalists. Like our mission is to provide journalists, policymakers, and the public with good data to kind of break up stereotypes, allow people to have solid data to write good stories, to kind of wrap the anecdotes around and ground them in data. And so first thing I just want to say is if you're a journalist here, thank you for the work that you are doing. It is vitally important. Yes. And I would say that more than any time in my lifetime, our nation needs a vibrant, independent, free press. We're going to need to stand behind you, and you're going to need to stand behind your colleagues when one of you is denied access to the administration, censored, or even jailed. An aggressively free press is particularly important in these days when religion and religious claims are being used as a cover for an authoritarian movement that is openly dismantling democratic institutions and undermining democratic norms. History teaches us that authoritarians almost always come cloaked in religious garb. They make belonging and citizenship about having the right religious identity that's tied to the religious identity of the nation. They turn politics into an apocalyptic blood sport where compromise is akin to betrayal. They talk of tribulation and deliverance, defilement and redemption, vengeance and a purifying fire, and finally a great new golden age that's going to be ushered in by the divinely ordained great leader. So I'm going to close by making a single plea. To keep our democracy safe, we're going to need journalists to remember that religions are institutions and traditions maintained by fallible, and my own Baptist tradition would say sinful, humans. And as such, the contemporary social manifestations of religion, like other human constructions, are fair objects of journalistic interrogation. We need journalists who are not deferential, but respectfully determined to take the religious claims of public actors seriously enough to question them. Failing to do so leaves propaganda's most powerful tool fully operational. Take, for example, Donald Trump's weaponization of anti-Christian bias and anti-Semitism. We as American citizens must all abhor bias and discrimination against anyone based on their religion. But our critical antenna should go up when we see an executive order focusing only on discrimination against the dominant religion in the land. A group experiencing only a fraction of the documented discrimination and hate crimes targeting Muslims or Jews. Our critical antenna should also go up when we see broad accusations of anti-Semitism being leveled against a university in ways that stifle academic freedom and free speech and seem less intended to make Jewish students safe than to diminish the institution and bring it to heel for political ends. Anti-Christian bias and anti-Semitism certainly exist in America and are shameful parts of our present and past and are important and valid concerns. But for authoritarians, valid concerns are primarily raw materials to be distorted and used for manipulative ends. When such sleights of hand, authoritarians license persecution of groups they declare disloyal while permitting favoritism of others, all supposedly in the name of protecting religious liberty. In the hands of authoritarians, self-proclaimed campaigns to protect against anti-Christian bias and anti-Semitism will ultimately be wielded as political weapons, targeting not just Muslims or Americans of no religion, but also eventually the wrong kinds of Christians and the wrong kinds of Jews. And we'll need journalists who understand what I see as the primary ideological threat before us today, white Christian nationalism. We have to grasp that white Christian nationalism is not a religious worldview that should be treated with deference, but as a set of propositions and a movement that should be identified as a fundamental threat to American democracy. We are in an existential struggle to answer a question that has plagued us since Europeans first landed on the shores of this country. Are we a pluralistic society where everyone, regardless of race and religion, stands on equal footing before the law? Or are we a divinely ordained promised land for European Christians? We'll need courage and tenacious journalists, along with an informed public, to grasp that only one of these visions is compatible with a liberal democracy and reflective of the complex realities of the religious landscape, both in Texas and in the nation. Thank you.
I want to give Robbie a chance to take a drink, but just a reminder for everyone here, on your phones, if you go to texastribune.org/ask, you can submit questions, and we'll get to your questions. We already have some questions submitted online as well. I actually wanted to start, Robbie, with a question, and hopefully you didn't address this when I stepped out, but referencing the nuns to those who are agnostic or identify as atheists. What kind of studies? My assumption here is that that's often grouped kind of together in a way, perhaps because it's hard to make some of those distinctions. But can you just speak a little more as to that kind of shift in the last decade or so and what that looks like?
Yeah, so just to be clear, when you see religiously unaffiliated from PRI, from Pew, from kind of most, it does group together atheists, agnostics, and people who claim nothing in particular on the surveys. We do that because actually when we look at their views on a whole other things, they tend to hold together. We can disaggregate them and do disaggregate them at times as well. So there are differences between them, of course. But that group together has really grown. So in the 1990s, for example, if you measured the people who said any of those things on a public opinion survey, it was in the single digits, like 8-9%, like in the 1990s. Again, that number today is 27% of the public that claims no religious affiliation. And the real marker here is if you look at Americans under the age of 30, we're here on a college campus, right? If you look at Americans who are like mostly kind of most likely to be here on the place like this, it is 40% who claim no religious affiliation. So that number has like really gone way, way up. And just to be clear about that too, it is not the best data looks like, it is not a temporary effect of just being 20. It's a generational difference. So if you take baby boomers, for example, and you take them back into their 20s, they're only 12% unaffiliated. Back in their 20s. Today, again, it's nearly 40% among young people today. So it is a generational shift that we're seeing, not just a factor of them being young and less established or whatever. Yeah.
Annie from I'm new to Texas. I'm going to mispronounce towns, but I'm assuming it's Louisville. Did I get it right? Or, okay. I don't assume anymore. Annie asks, would you tell us more about how the survey was conducted? Maybe about the method, who was surveyed, and how many participated?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to do that. At PRI, we only do random probability samples. That's really important because in these days where you can scrape data from here, there, and yon, or get convenient samples by just getting people to opt in, you can get 1 million people in a sample, but it doesn't represent anything. At PRI, we only use random probability samples, which means that everybody in the country, in theory, has an equal option of being invited to participate in the survey. So we use the knowledge panel that's by Ipsos. It's one of the kind of handful of people that maintain a big a sample. Our smallest surveys are about 5,000 people usually because we want to get higher confidence. Your average political survey that you see is somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people. Ours are 5,000 people. The data that you see here, the religious diversity data was 500,000 people. The data that you saw at the state level, where we show all states and down into Texas, is 20,000 people in a national sample. So these are very, very big sample sizes, fairly small margins of error. But if you want to look, one of the great things we've tried to do is to be we're part of the Transparency Initiative, which is an initiative of the American Association of Public Opinion Research. So on our website, you can actually go and you can sort of pull up the questionnaire for every study we have published. You can actually read exactly how the questions were asked, what order they were asked in, exactly what the people got. And then in the back is a big old you can take a deep dive down in the methodology rabbit hole if you want. It tells you exactly how the samples were collected.
So this is great. I mean, we have several people who have kind of been digging into the data and want to know about certain assumptions we can or can't make from the data. Erica from San Antonio, compared to white evangelicals, white mainline Protestants score quite a bit lower on the Christian nationalism scale, but didn't Trump carry the white mainline and white Catholic votes? What happened here?
That's a great question. Yes, that's exactly true. To say that Christian nationalism is highly and pretty linearly correlated with vote for Trump is not to say it's the only factor, right, in voting for Trump. So it is true that all of that is accurate. Yes, that scored lower on the Christian nationalism scale than white evangelicals do. But this is the thing that Trump, the only post-mortem thing I wrote about the election was for Time magazine, and I wrote a piece called "What White Christians Have Wrought." And there I basically made the point that everybody has now memorized maybe the number that like 8 in 10 white evangelicals have voted for Trump every time he's been on the ballot, 2016, 2020, 2024, and it was 85% in 2024. So everybody kind of knows that. But what people don't tend to know is that other groups of white Christians also voted majority for Trump, right? So it was nearly 6 in 10 white non-evangelicals who voted for Trump, nearly 6 in 10 white Catholics who also voted for Trump. And that wasn't an anomaly. That was true every time he's been on the ballot as well. So there's been this kind of very steady support among white Christians overall, support for Trump. I do think that even if you're not kind of fully on board with the Christian nationalism thing, there is a kind of, I have talked about it as a kind of shift from the Christian right. And what's interesting to me is that we don't hear the term values voters being used by those actors anymore. For obvious reasons, perhaps, might be a little too hard a brand to maintain. But I've argued that I think we ought to think about them as nostalgia voters, right? That they kind of shifted from being values voters to nostalgia voters. And so the pull is not just Christian nationalism, it's a broader pull, and I think there's maybe no more powerful word in that 4-letter Make America Great Again than the last one, the again part. I think that's where all the power actually is.
That's a great question from Katie from Fort Worth. When people self-identify in a religious category, say white evangelical,
Yep.
How do you measure the depth of that identity in terms of actual religious practice, like church-going, tithing, volunteering, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So we do allow people to self-identify on the surveys. We're not like asking them theological questions and then putting them into buckets based on their theology. If they say they, are an evangelical born-again Christian, we will take their word for it, and that's the bucket we put them in. That's just saying that we ask about, on almost all of our surveys, ask about attendance, frequency of prayer, and frequency of engagement with the sacred text. So we have those measures that we can measure it all. One very interesting thing, we're talking about the difference between white evangelical, white non-evangelical Protestants, for example, is that what we found is that, and part of what's behind this question, I think, is like, how much is the Christian in name only phenomenon active, right? That's kind of what's behind, I think, that question. It turns out that what we're finding is that in terms of Christian nationalism and support for Trump, voting Republican, it's actually the church-going evangelicals that are more likely to support Trump. The church-going evangelicals are more likely to be Christian nationalists than those who attend church less. And what's interesting about it, though, is that that is not true for the non-evangelical white Protestants. So the main line, it's actually the opposite trend. The more you go to church, the less likely you were to vote for Trump. So there's very interesting engagement and depth matters to this question. Yeah.
Samar from McKinney asks, can you please speak to the socioeconomic factors that play a role in feeding into stereotypes and adding to the perceived dominance of certain race and religion?
Yeah, also about well, part of that's about power, I think. So I can answer it a couple of ways. One is about power, and I think I mentioned the State House at the beginning. So which religions are being brought into the State House by the people who are elected to those offices, right? There's clearly a socioeconomic thing there. You could see it even in the at the national level, where we do have some better data about that. The House of Representatives, which is easier to get elected to, is more religiously diverse than the Senate, right? And that's because of very old kind of power, right? And so, and particularly, and you can see it like in the Supreme Court, the early presidents. There was like one denomination that has been historically overrepresented in Supreme Court justices. It's Episcopalians, right? They've had more Supreme Court justices than anybody else. Now, what's that about? It's because they've always been at the highest part of the socioeconomic ladder, right? So access to power, access to those kinds of things. So I think we're kind of seeing that, and we even had a term for it, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, WASP, right? That kind of acronym WASP was kind of a shorthand for that power. Right? David Hollenbach, a historian, I quote him a lot. He was saying, look, if you were in charge of something big and important, even as late as the middle of the 20th century, chances are you were white, you were male, you were Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? And that was kind of the power structure of the country. I think we're seeing that shift now, but I think that still drives a lot of our stereotypes about like what's the dominant religion and our wedding mainstream religion. Even that term mainline, right, was intended to kind of be a marker of dominance.
Bobby from Austin says recent PRRI data shows that Black Christians also have high levels of belief in Christian nationalism. How does this manifest politically? Yeah. How are these views different than those held by white Christian nationalists?
Yeah, that's interesting. We were actually surprised to see the higher levels of Christian nationalism on those questions among African-American Christians. True, again, both at Texas and in the national level. But then we started looking into it, and we asked, okay, well, does that make them far more likely to be Republican? Does it make them far more likely to support Trump? Does it make them far more likely to support political violence? And the answer to all those questions was no. So it's interesting that you sort of like, it really takes kind of Christian nationalism plus whiteness to kind of turn the power on, right, in a way. And so the race, this has always been true about race. I mean, I am stunned, for example, that white evangelical Christians and African-American Christians share a lot in common, right? If you look at hymns, you look at approaches to the Bible, like basic theology, like it's a lot shared. And yet, when we go to measure vote, every time, there are no groups on the opposite ends of political voting than African-American Protestants and white evangelical Protestants, right? It doesn't always, like there's more differences between them, white evangelicals, and their Black brothers and sisters in Christianity than there are between white evangelicals and Muslims, right? Than there are between white evangelicals and the unaffiliated. Like they're at the polls. And so it's really, to see the power of kind of racial identity kind of taking theology and bending it into politics it's really quite striking. Yeah.
Just a couple more questions here, but we do have some time. If you have anyone else here has questions, at texastribune.org/ask. Feel free to share your questions there. Certainly, part of the kind of larger national conversations over the past few years, the lack of trust in institutions, and I'm wondering about how your work looks at the larger association with places of worship may link to kind of overall larger civic participation, civic literacy, if I've given you enough clarity
Sure.
there as to what I'm asking.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, I gave you the affiliation numbers, right? But the attendance numbers have been plummeting as well. So, because those are two different things. One's about identity and how I think of myself. The other's what I do, right? And that's a powerful thing. Like what I do and which communities am I a part of, and which communities do I trust? And we're literally seeing those numbers just plummet. COVID actually was like quite hard. Like the numbers are already coming down. And I think we still haven't quite seen the full fallout of kind of where we are post COVID, but it's a crisis. I mean, the kind of trust in civic institutions, it's a crisis. And in journalism, I mean, my home paper is the Washington Post, right? That had "Democracy Dies in Darkness," right, as its moniker, right? And it's dark. So I think that's just kind of one thing among others. But I think the challenge we're all facing is, how do, especially when you hear journalists, how do we build things that people trust? How do we build institutions? Because that fragmentation is absolutely part of how authoritarianism thrives, how truth becomes attacked and isn't sturdy.
So I think this is a helpful follow-up question to some of what we talked about with the unaffiliated. Joe says, do you know why? Is there data to suggest why the unaffiliated number is growing among young adults?
Yes, we have some pretty good data on that. There's been a lot of people studying, this back, Campbell and Putnam's American Grace, like about 10 years ago, a dozen years ago now, was kind of one of the first books that kind of really measure this. And we know a few things. We know it's disproportionately young people. We can measure that both by their own identity. We can also measure it because the median age of most white Christian groups are ticking up. Right, so you kind of see the median age going up. The median age of white evangelicals today is 56. That's me, right? So I am the median age of white evangelicals in the country. And if you look at, by the way, if you look at the median age of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, it's like in the 30s, right? So it's really different compared to kind of white Christian groups. And then the things we know, we've actually asked, right? And so we had, for example, it was about 40% of young people who told us straight out that one of the reasons, and these were people we did a survey of people who were raised religious and left, right? So these are people who were in the fold and then not. And most of them, by the way, kind of left in their teens. This is when they reported they left. So it's actually not college. It was before that they sort of left. But what they said was, one of the key things they said was the negative treatment of gay and lesbian people was 40% of them said that was an important reason why they left. 40%. Right, so if you're like a marketing person, you're running a business, and you find out that 40% of your customers left, but for one thing, it'd be something you'd probably pay attention to. The other things, though, that have been internal things like sexual abuse scandals in the church have kind of eroded trust. Negative treatment of women in many congregations as well, or lack of even a leadership path for any women who want to pursue clergy or even deaconship or any of those kinds of things. So it's been a kind of range of those things. And then I think the kind of bigger piece of it has been that for many young people, they grew up with the kind of dominant face of religion was a kind of very politicized Christian right movement, and that they're reacting in many ways to that as well. Kind of that's not something many of them find that attractive. Yeah.
Kathleen from Dallas asks, one of your questions asked whether the country should be based on Christian values. Did you try to tease out what Christian values means, i.e. social justice versus political positions like abortion?
Yeah, no, so we actually have other questions that get at that, but in that particular thing, it is the question is exactly as we read it on the screen. So it's what they are interpreting in there, but we have some good confidence in this. This is one of the things, it's I think a challenge sometimes for lay people who aren't statisticians to understand the way these statistical scales work, but we're not cherry picking questions here, just to be very clear. We tested more than a dozen questions to kind of come up with those 5, and we threw out questions that were fuzzy, that looked anomalous, that didn't seem to be consistent, or people seem to be replying in different ways. There's a measure of consistency called Cronbach's alpha that measures the Cronbach's alpha on these 5 questions together is 0.9, right? It is a super high. Like anything, literally like 0.75, you could get it published, right, in a peer review article. This is like close to 0.9 on these questions. So they're highly consistent. So even though at first read, you might read it and go, oh, well, maybe that doesn't mean that. But like when you actually look underneath and see how consistent it is with the other ones, it just means that your answer on one of these questions is highly predictive of your answer across the other 5.
Jack Jenkins, from RNS, one of our moderators today, says, apologies if you addressed this in the presentation, but I was struck by the chart that showed a notable but not huge uptick in support for Christian nationalism among Texans, given that the state has been a hotbed for legislation many critics decry as Christian nationalist. But given that U.S. politics is largely dictated by who shows up, do you have any data that examines or hints at political participation among Christian nationalists, voting, attending rallies, activism, et cetera, and how it compares to others?
Yeah, I covered that 4 times, Jack. No. Thank you for the question. So I don't think we have data on rallies like that kind of. We do have voting data, right? And what we do know is that white evangelicals show up to vote. Right, and you're right. Showing up is power, and so, for example, our best look back at 2024 is that white evangelicals were 13% of the population, but they were somewhere around 19% of voters. Right, so you kind of have that disproportionate turnout. That even though they're a smaller group, and here's the thing, though, and in primaries, they are super powerful, right? Because they are like a third off the bat of Republicans. They're a third of the base because they're so heavily loaded into one political party. And so at the primary level, they are really an outsize. They've like tripled their presence within the Republican Party compared to their actual numbers. Yeah.
Elaine asks, I've heard about the increase in evangelical Christianity among young white men. What information do you have to share about that?
Yeah, I think it's been overblown, to be frank. So what's interesting there is that we're like in a 1,000 person, if we were only doing 1,000 person samples, for example, we would be challenged to have enough young people identifying as evangelical to even do any analysis in a 1,000 person sample. Right? So it's worth noting that like small movements among a group that has been very, very small, like you can often make a big thing out of it. So we should pay attention to it. But what's actually kind of so my colleague Melissa Deckman has been doing a lot of work around Gen Z women, right? And I think there's actually a bigger story among Gen Z women sort of pushing off of that world rather than Gen Z men kind of coming into it, right? So part of the reason why there's more of a disproportionate gender balance among religious-going people among younger is not so much because there's been more men piling into churches, because there's been more women walking out the back door. And I think it's both of those things that we have to pay attention to.
This will be the last question, and I do want to let everyone know here that we have Robbie's latest book outside in Terabang Books. Independent bookstore here in Dallas is just outside if you want to get a copy of the book after this. But you made an appeal to close your talk in terms of the role of journalism and good journalism in telling the story. But many here who are deeply interested in telling that story and doing so accurately may not be journalists. So I'm wondering if there's a larger message to everyone here and those who are online about how they can navigate what at times can be sensitive conversations, but being able to use accurate information, not a political speech, but rather what it means to be telling a more accurate story about religion in Texas.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm the president of PRRI. I believe data and facts matter, right, in these things. So hopefully, I don't think they're ever the deciding factor, but they do matter. So I hope that, by putting this data out, and I should say to everyone who's here, we do make sure we get this data in the hands of journalists, but it's also up on the website and available for anyone to download, right? It's up. So it's prri.org. Also to anyone who's like a student or a statistician, as part of our transparency initiative, we actually make not only the results and the reports and all of that, which we try to make very digestible and easy to use, but if you're a data head, we make the data sets available to download. So you actually, if you're a grad student, download the data set, right, and do your own analysis on it. So we do embargo them usually for a year, but after that, so we're putting generally $500,000 of free social science data out into the public sphere every year as part of that commitment for getting the facts out there, doing that. But I'm hopefully that's it, right? Engage. And I think the same thing is like, just because a claim is made with kind of religious overtones or theology doesn't mean we can't interrogate it, right? And we really have to do that. Like, so kind of all of our responsibility.
I thank Robbie Jones for his opening keynote today. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Welcome you to grab a little more breakfast, chat with fellow attendees here, and a reminder that Robbie's book is on sale right outside. Thank you so much.